Hello, young math Padawans. In this video, we are going to take a closer look at using the properties of equality to solve equations. Just as a quick reminder, here are two properties of equality. Take a moment to read through both. Just as a reminder, the multiplication property of equality, or MPOE, means that if you're going to multiply one side of the equation, or all terms on that side, you also have to multiply the other side by the same value for that equation to remain true. The division property of equality, or DPOE, states the same thing, except for that we are dividing both sides, all terms on both sides, by the same value for that equation to be true. So let's get into today's equations. Okay, so to begin our notes, we do have two important vocabulary phrases here. The first one is, what does it mean to solve an equation? So solving an equation means to use the properties of equality to isolate the variable and determine the solution. So solving is a process. A lot of times we can figure out the solution by looking at the equation, but to solve means to show the process. The second vocabulary term is solution, and solution is the value of the variable that makes the equation true. And the key word really here is true. So let's look at equation 1. Equation 1, we have x plus 10 equals 21. Looking at this equation, can you tell me what x equals here? What is the solution? Many of you can look at this equation and tell me that x must equal 11 because 11 plus 10 is how we get 21. That is an awesome skill. Now let's go in and apply the properties of equality to get to that solution to show the process of solving. I always put a line down the middle of my equal sign to keep the left side separate from the right. And now I have to determine which property of equality am I going to use. Let's try addition first. If I come in and add 10 to both sides of the equation, does that solve it? Well, let's see. This becomes x plus 20 equals 31. It's an equivalent equation, meaning x still equals 11, but it hasn't been solved. So addition property of equality did not work here. So let's try the subtraction property of equality. If I come in and subtract 10 from both sides of the equation, what does it look like after I simplify? Well, I'm still left with x. 10 minus 10 is 0, and 21 minus 10 is 11. And I can simplify x plus 0 to just x, because anything plus 0 is itself. So now I have solved the equation. So what are these reasons? These reasons are basically stating what we did here. The first thing we did is we chose to apply the subtraction property of equality. And then after we did the subtraction property of equality, we did the math. We did the subtraction. That in math is called simplify. Simplify means do the math. Now, before we can just accept that this is true, it's important to check the solution. Actually plug it in and make sure that it makes the equation true. Yes, it does. Which means what I like to do next is put a box around my solution, because this is the value of the variable that makes the equation true. And this is the process of solving. Let's look at equation 2, very similar to equation 1. Now, looking at this equation, x minus 10 equals 21, can you figure out the value of the variable that makes this true? Some of you might have, and some of you might be thinking, ooh, that's subtraction. I'm not sure, so maybe we're not sure on this one. So the first step is always the same. I put a line down the middle of my equal sign to separate the left side from the right. I highly recommend doing this. Now, I see subtraction here, so I figure let's try subtraction first. What if I were to subtract 10 from both sides? Careful here. This is a negative 10 in that top equation. So when I go in to simplify, I have x minus 20 equals 11, because negative 10 minus 10 is negative 20. Now, I have an equivalent equation here. However, it's not a solved equation. So it doesn't appear SPOE was the correct property to use. So that leaves us to try using APOE. What if I add 10 to both sides and simplify? Okay, I'm left with x. And then again, recall that this is a negative 10. Negative 10 plus 10 is 0. And 21 plus 10 is 31. And then anything plus 0 is itself, so x plus 0 is x, and it appears I have a possible solution here. Okay, x might equal 31. So let's go in and put in our reasons. To see that my math is correct, and before I can put a box around my answer, I'm going to check that solution. Yes, it does. Therefore, this is the correct solution. 31 is the correct solution to this equation, and I know that my work was done correctly. So as you stated in the intro, we're looking at solving using multiplication property of equality, MPOE, or division property of equality, DPOE. So we're solving these equations using either multiplication or division. Let's look at equation number 1. As always, I like to start by putting a line down the middle of my equal sign to keep the left side separate from the right. Let's start with multiplication. So multiplication property of equality means I have to multiply both sides of the equation by the same value to remain true. So looking at this, I notice that x is being multiplied by 3. So I would think, okay, what if I try multiplying both sides of this equation by 3? 3 times 3x, well, 3 times 3 is 9, so that would be 9x, okay? And then 3 times 21, well, 3 times 20 is 60, and 3 times 1 is 3, so that would be 63. Now, have we solved this equation? No. What we have done is called creating an equivalent equation, meaning whatever x equals in the original equation equals the same thing in this new one, but x is not by itself, meaning we haven't actually solved anything. So MPOE was not the correct property of equality to use for this specific equation. That leaves us to try DPOE, dividing. Now again, I notice that x is being multiplied by 3. So I would think, okay, let's go in and try dividing by 3 and just see what happens. Wait a minute, 3 divided by 3, that's just 1, isn't it? Yeah, 3 divided by 3 is 1. So now this is 1x equals, and 21 divided by 3 is 7. But is x isolated? Well, yeah, because 1 times x is just x. So we're left with x equals 7. And this is called a solved equation because x is now completely by itself on that side. So as we remember, our reasons are just what did we do. Now, to be sure that this is actually the correct solution to this equation, we need to go in and conduct what's called a check. Guess what? 3 times 7 does equal 21. So what I like to tell my students is that it has deserved the solution box, and DPOE was the correct property of equality to solve this equation. So now let's look at what happens when we have equations that have division. Do we use division to solve division or something else? I don't know. Looking at equation number 3, though, x divided by 3 equals 9. I'm going to go ahead and put my line down the middle of my equal sign here. All right, let's start with multiplication. Now, here's the tricky part. This is a fraction. Notice that this has a fraction bar. So because it is a fraction, we have to remember that fractions stand for division. So by multiplying here, I need to make sure that whatever I multiply, I'm also multiplying it by a fraction. So let's say, for example, I was going to multiply this by 3. That means I'm multiplying by 3 over 1, not 1 over 3. That would be multiplying by 1/3. So in the numerator, you have your multiplication. In the denominator, you have your division. Now again, on the other side, I'm multiplying by 3 over 1. Let's just see what happens when we apply this multiplication. Okay, so as we recall, the rules for multiplying fractions is just to multiply straight across. So that would mean 3x in the numerator, and 1 times 3 is 3 in the denominator. And then on the other side, 9 times 3 is 27 over 1. Now this might look a little messy, but bear with me here. What is 3 divided by 3? That is just 1. So now we have 1x equals, and what's 27 divided by 1? That's just 27. And then finally, what is 1 times x? That's just x. So right now we're left with x equals 27. So is this equation solved? Yeah, because x is by itself. So it appears that multiplication was the way to go, but the only way to be sure is to check our solution. Yes, it does. 27 divided by 3 does equal 9, which means 27 is the solution to this equation, and we used MPOE to solve.